Welcome to the GTI Tours Podcast. Join us as we go behind the scenes and discuss with trip leaders, guides, biblical scholars, and more to bring the land and the lessons of the Bible to life.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the GTI Tours Podcast. My name is Rich, and I'm going to be your host today as we dive into the land and the lessons of the Bible. Doing what we like to do. We like to go to these locations. We like to open the Bible. We like to try to see where the Bible comes alive. And when you get a chance to go to these far-off lands, we find with Bible in hand, you have a pretty good time, like seeing what the Bible and the context is. And so I'm joined with my good friend Gerald today, and we've decided that we want to try to do something a little bit different with the podcast for the next few, is that we want to pick small little topics of places that maybe you've been or maybe places you've never been that we think are interesting, things that we've come across along the process of making these journeys. And so today we dive into Turkey because we love Turkey so much. Turkey is an amazing land to go to. It's the New Testament. It's at least, I would say, at least 80 to 90% of the New Testament is written from, to, or somewhere within the region of the area of modern day Turkey. And when we go to Turkey, not only do we love to see great sights, and maybe you've heard us say this before, but we love to eat at the restaurants that are there because the food in Turkey is just amazing. Jerrell, I mean, what do you think about food in Turkey? Do you like it?
I'm not going to lie, Rich. I like Turkish food. I like Mediterranean food. We love these restaurants. Man, the restaurants we pick, they're more than food stops. They're like experiences. And you know, you and I can't even pronounce the name of these restaurants, much less, I don't even know if we know the names. We just nickname them. The guides know the nicknames. Even the owners know the nickname. What we got? We've got the Parrot Restaurant.
Dancing Parrot. There's a dancing parrot.
Parrot. We're not lying. You got a guy on this old, ancient Turkish lyre type guitar looking thing. Sounds like a banjo meets sitar. And the bird is like literally dancing. So we call that the Parrot Restaurant. And then we got the Frog Restaurant.
Which you're not eating frogs. There's no frogs involved except for a statue of a frog.
There's a statue of the frog and everybody gets a selfie with that. But today we are going to, I don't know, this may top the other two. It definitely tops them in regards to ambiance. It doesn't top the food of Mama's though. Mama's outside of Ephesus, and when Mama is there, the griddle is on fire. But where we're going today, it's in the Lycus Valley, and we call it the Waterfall Restaurant because we are eating in front of a waterfall that's flowing from Mount Cadmus, the highest mountain in that area. We're talking 10,200 and some odd feet. And this water is the backdrop of the lunch. And the lunch ain't bad, Rich. They've got some salads, and they've got this, what they call Turkish pide, P-I-D-A, P-I-D-E. It's just flatbread, but it is some of my favorite eatings. But there's the food, but the ambiance, but more than the ambiance, there's some stories that come with this
There are
place.
some stories here, and that you're right. This is what makes it great. So let's dive into, as you and I would be eating some fish and some pide or whatever. What is some of the stories that go on in this region?
Stories in this, you know, as they say where I grew up, you'd have a young lady that, you know, she kept getting pregnant, and they'd be like, there's something in the water. Well, at this restaurant in this whole region, that would be kind of the mantra that's been echoed for some 2,000 years. There's something in the water. What do we mean? There's mysterious stories of miraculous healings that go all the way back 2,000. Now we're talking Lycus Valley. We're just 2 miles up the road from the ancient city of Colossae, which is about to be excavated. It's set just as a tell for generations and generations, and they've done some ground surveys. But just a couple years ago, they did some more extensive surveys, found ceramics and pottery dating back 3500 BC. And so super excited to see what's going to unfold in days to come. But most people know that area. They know the letter of Colossians. They know
They sure do.
this little letter that Paul wrote. But what most people don't know is we hear, Colossae just kind of trailed off into the distant memory as Laodicea and Hierapolis, two neighboring cities, kind of took the spotlight. And they did in some ways, but this city in and around Colossae became one of the most popular pilgrim sites in all the world up until the 12th century. And it all had to do with some water, even water that to this day, the locals think there's something going on there that can bring healing.
It's so true. And this is the amazing thing. It just, geography and context and all the things going on here is that there is, like Gerald said, something in the water. I mean, if we were going to call this podcast something, we'd probably call it something in the water. But when you're here, there's over 2,000 years of history going on. And so we kind of got to pan this camera back a little bit to like make sense of it. But this region has been known for mysterious healings even to today. So why don't we like kind of look at that a little bit more as we like dive into it? Because the Lycus River Valley was like this major corridor into the ancient world. Trade routes moved through it. Gerald and I like to talk with people all the time. Like, you had wool production. It made cities wealthy. You had ideas that were being floated through here because of the Roman Empire and the Greek empires and all the different empires that made their way through. You had religion, philosophies, pilgrims. It all flowed through this valley. But every city in this valley needs water, and every city in this area has a different relationship to water that's right here. So why don't you kind of start with that?
Yeah, totally. The whole region, everything is revolving in some ways around water and healing. And there's a major school of medicine that's taking place here. There's a temple dedicated to a god by the name of Menkaure, like great ancient Phrygian god that later then Asclepius kind of morphs into in the Greek era. Hierapolis is known for these hot thermal springs. There's over 200 springs that or 17 different springs that are springing up all over the city of Hierapolis. They're ranging from 95 degrees to 212 degrees. And in the ancient world, it's a place of healing. Hierapolis probably merits a podcast all by itself.
Sure
but people know these springs of Hierapolis, but it's also, that's a mystical healing center connected with snakes and Hades and Apollo. So you got that going on, and then that's feeding into the textiles there. Laodicea nearby doesn't have water, but is piping in the water, but it's got challenges when the water gets there. That too is probably a whole episode by itself. Colossae, though, it's being fed by these cold natural springs that are springing up in places out of the ground, out of nowhere. In fact, all the way back in the 5th century, Herodotus writes about this area, talks about Colossae being a prominent city in the area of Phrygia and how Xerxes comes here, and talks about how this river just disappears into the ground and then pops up, he says, like 5 stadia later, like 2 miles later. And that's still happening today. And you even hear this in Revelation. There's these nuances where the book of Revelation, Jesus speaks to the geography and the theology and the states of people's hearts related to water.
Yeah, Jesus says, to the church of Laodicea, like, you are neither cold nor hot in Revelation 3:15. And that's not just abstract theology. That's something we try to bring alive to people when they're on these trips. It's just going, when the way Jesus is speaking, the way he's doing this is he's bringing out something that everybody understood. Like, literally, they lived between hot healing waters of Hierapolis and then also the cool waters that were refreshing that were coming from Colossae that were right there.
Totally. So let's narrow in to Colossae, because that's where the stories, well, they're strange everywhere, but they are particularly strange in the area of Colossae. So in this whole region, you've got, as we mentioned, rivers that disappear underground. You've got springs that are coming up out of the ground, both in Colossae, Hierapolis, this whole Lycus Valley, even the hotel we stay at, it's in the Lycus Valley, several miles down from Herodotus. You're just driving to town. We call it the mushroom. They've put this man-made structure over an ancient spring that's just springing up in the middle of the road, in the middle of the intersection. Like in Michigan, we have these roundabouts that you got to figure out how to jump rope and not get in a crash. And so you have a roundabout that's a mushroom, and the mushroom is steaming with this hot natural spring water. But what's fascinating is in the ancient mindset, that's not just geology. That's not just like, wow, nice land feature, way to maximize that on city planning. No, no, no. These ancient fissures, anytime there's a chasm that goes into the ground, especially related to water and in caves, the ancient worldview is that's not just a cave, that's a portal, that's a gateway, that's an entrance to the underworld. In fact, in Hierapolis, you've got what's called the plutonium. There's a fissure where gases were coming out in the first century, so much so that like birds and animals were dying in that. And there's a whole bunch of mysticism related to that. But the point is that plutonium it's a gateway to Pluto or Hades, the god of the underworld. It's the gates of hell, if you will.
And that's kind of in the same way. If you've been to Israel, like we go to Caesarea Philippi, which is the gates to hell, like right there. So same kind of context going on a little bit.
Totally, totally. And so you've got these fissures, you've got this worldview, and so this whole region becomes known for healing, and often the healings are related to these chasms, right? So in Colossae, that's no less the different. This river that goes and just disappears, and that is going to spring up this aura in that area. Now we know in Colossians, they already had some funky stuff going on with angels that Paul's addressing when he writes the new letter of Colossians, right?
Yeah, like Paul writes like Colossians in with this region, and he's talking about angel worship and all these different pieces there because he's dealing with mysticism that already like is happening in this region.
Yeah, I think it's chapter 2, around verse 18. It says, "Do not let anyone who
Yeah,
delights in false humility and the worship of angels disqualify you." So he's writing, like you said, 60 AD. He's addressing issues in the church, and already in this church, they're struggling. Like where is Jesus in the pecking order of things? And he'll even be that Jesus is before all things, in all things, created all things, and in him he's like the supreme one, the supremacy. And there's already some challenges in the first century about Jesus and angels, and Paul's leaning into that. What's fascinating is, as we're going to see and unravel this story a little bit, angels, or one angel in particular, becomes really a big deal in Colossae, and Paul is going to lean into that. You've got mystical Judaism and other things he's speaking to, but what we want to focus in on, let's talk about angels and water and healing. And what's fascinating, fast forward just a little bit before we back up and say what happened, you've got some major councils happening throughout church history. A number of those happened just down the road from Colossae at the place called Laodicea. And when we visit Laodicea, you got this massive Byzantine church that, like, we're talking like mega church of the ancient world, and some pretty big to-do council meetings took place there in the 4th century, around 363, 364 in there. And one of the things that they're addressing is like angels and the elevation of angels. And many historians think they're looking across the valley to
right.
Colossae,
Yep.
and they're like, "Hey boys, we're talking to you now." Now there's some church competition, which is quite interesting, but that too probably is a podcast for another time. But that's going on in this area, and there's some worship of angels going on.
And like you just said, like reiterating just that Colossians passage right there, do not let anyone who delights in false humility and the worship of angels disqualify you. You know, it's like we were just talking about, it comes out of nowhere is what it feels like, this line where you're like, okay, I get the other things that they're talking about, that Paul's talking about in Colossians, but all of a sudden angels really, like, this is something that we've got to deal with. And like we're kind of playing with right here, this is a big deal in the region, so much so that Paul's going to bring it up, so much so that we probably got to dive a little bit around to kind of understand it a little bit more. So,
All right, let's dive in.
let's do it.
Let's dive in. Now, part of this we need to understand. We've got the biblical account. We just referred to some things Paul is saying. Colossians 2:18, angels, Jesus' supremacy, chapter 1, verse 19, around there. So that's our anchor points. That's what we know. We know Paul wrote to this region. We know Paul knows a guy by the name of Epaphras. Paul knows a guy in this region by the name of Philemon and Archippus. He knows the lady Nympha at Laodicea and the house that meets in her church. So that's what we know. And then we have church tradition, stories and traditions, legends at times that have emerged throughout times. And they often include people like John the Apostle, or sometimes I call him John the Evangelist or John the Theologian, Philip the Apostle, Philip the Apostle. We know he goes to Hierapolis and he's going to speak there. But there's a church father. His name is Papias, and he's going to be a bishop at Hierapolis. He's going to be born around 60 AD, but he's an adult and he's teaching, kind of leading that region around 95 to 120 AD. He writes of himself and he says, I'm basically a companion of Polycarp. In other words, he's like, I'm in the same discipleship cohort as Polycarp. Polycarp's going to be the bishop at this time in Smyrna over on the Western Shore.
Which is probably another podcast that we're going to need to do.
And so we're talking, he's the bishop at Smyrna. Polycarp, we know, is a disciple of the Apostle John. Jesus picks 12. John's one of the 12. John's going to go to Asia Minor, and he's going to raise up his own disciples. Polycarp's one of them. Papias talks of himself as a hearer of John and basically a companion of Polycarp. So we're talking into the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century AD. Papias talks about Philip coming to Hierapolis, the generation before, preaching there. He also talks about John and John coming in this region and both of them falling asleep in Asia Minor. Now, the story goes is that John, the evangelist and the theologian, is going to come through this area. And these guys, John and Philip, are going to prophesy in and around the area of Colossae that there's going to be a spring, or there is a spring, and there's going to be healing that's going to be flowing, pun intended, through that spring, right? And so that's where the story, where the tradition is. Did they go there? Did they prophesy that? I don't know. Did they go to that region? Really good chance. To whatever they prophesied, we don't know for sure. But we do know there's some stories that start popping up around that prophecy that they said was take place.
Yeah. And centuries later, this exact region becomes one of the greatest centers of like devotion and pilgrimage. So what we're going to see here is that people are going to start believing some of these stories and they're going to start making their way to this location. So I think we need to like unpack some of these crazy stories because as you and I have been there, we've had locals tell us the story, and then we started reading and studying the stories, and we're kind of like, whoa, who would have thought in the sleepy little town of Colossae that this was like a pilgrimage site for so long that everyone wanted to come to?
Totally. All right, so let's jump into some stories.
Let's start with some stories. So why don't you get us going here with some stories of maybe angels and
let's do it.
Water?
All right, so there's Philip and John. They come through. Allegedly, they prophesy there's going to be something in the water. Around the 2nd century, these stories begin to spin around. One is there's a dad from Laodicea. The text refers to him as a pagan, right? So he's obviously not a Christian, but he's heard about what's happening in Colossae around the spring or springs. And so this particular guy, he's got a daughter. The daughter, some accounts say she's deaf. More specifically, she's mute. She's unable to speak. So whether she was deaf and able to talk, she can't talk. He takes her to Colossae. And either she drinks the water, one account says he splashes water on her face. And as soon as he does, she like screams out, "Great is your power." And then this is the part where it gets a little tricky. Now, she gives a credit to God and to Christ, but when she says, "Great is your power," she actually makes mention of Michael, the Archangel. And there's a couple of titles that are thrown around with him. Basically means like field marshal or commander of the host, but most people then in later times just call him the Archangel Michael. And so she gives glory in a sense, like, "Great are you, Michael."
Yeah. And here we go. Like, this is going to start something that gets the wheels moving as far as like healing, because she's healed. And what does her father do in the process?
All right. So she gets healed. He goes back. What do you do? I mean, you got little Annie here, whatever her name was, and everybody now sees her hearing and talking, and he's like over there. Well, as the story goes, he evidently had some means. He's wealthy.
Mhm.
He commissions a chapel, a church, a building, if you will, to be built over that spring to commemorate that spring, which you see that all over the ancient world in the Byzantine era of churches being built over sacred sites. You've got 125 AD, give or take 35 AD, that in that time frame, Helena, Constantine's mom, she's going to Bethlehem and building churches everywhere over these sites to commemorate them, to remember them, etc. So he commemorates a church building to be built over. He goes back to Hierapolis and he finds a boy around 8 to 10 years old by the name of Archippus. And that's created a little bit of confusion of this interest because in the book of Colossians, chapter 4, verse 17,
He
Paul,
shows up.
yeah, Paul shows up. I don't know. You remember that? He says, somebody, he's just writing to the church. It's the end of the sermon, if you will. And Paul's like, would somebody tell Archippus to pay attention to the ministry he's received in the Lord so that he fulfills it? I mean, talk about getting called out in the middle of the church service. But so some say maybe this is the same Archippus. Others are like, no, this is after that time. But that name became a popular name because, hello, he's Mr. Big Stuff in the early church. But he gets a boy about 8, 10 years old by the name of Archippus to basically be the caretaker of this church. And as the story goes, he does so for the next 75 years. There's some pretty aesthetic practices attached to him, kind of John the Baptist-esque. He's wearing clothes that like animal skins. He's got this very meager diet. He doesn't bathe very often. Wasn't married, by the way. And he's there just kind of taking care of the church. And you've got pilgrims that began coming to this church. The pagans, the non-Christ followers in this area, they're starting to look to these springs. And at times Jesus is often connected, but it is at times like who's getting the credit here? Is it Michael?
Exactly.
Is it Jesus? Is it the spring? And Jesus is never completely removed, but it is a little suspect. And that's part of how traditions develop.
Syncretism. It's how things kind of all come together, right?
It is. And these pagans are starting to follow Jesus, and they're not too happy about that. They get a little upset indeed.
And this is interesting too, because this is where the story becomes kind of really cool historically as we kind of look at it.
Yeah.
Colossae spent centuries living in the shadow of Hierapolis and Laodicea. Hierapolis has been the big deal. Laodicea is the big deal.
Yeah.
Economically, politically, Colossae begins to just kind of go away. And then all of a sudden, this spiritual thing kind of, or whatever we want to call it, is happening. And it comes back onto the forefront. And now people, this forgotten city, are all of a sudden let's go to Colossae. And they're making their way that direction as pilgrims.
Yeah, pilgrims are flooding into this region. They're traveling there. And what are they seeking? They're seeking healing, like physical healing. They're seeking restoration. They're seeking miracles. And they're not just seeking it. They're giving accounts that they're actually taking place, that they're encountering God. And we know that pilgrimages is growing in this area. People wanted to visit where the apostles visited. People want to visit where the apostles died or were martyred. People want to visit where a miracle happened. And humans are just, I don't know, we're fickle like that, right? And there's an element, you gotta admire them for wanting to visit these sacred spaces and places in hopes that they too could encounter God. We see it at some of the places we go in Israel and everywhere, that it gets almost smells a little bit like idolatry and the hope's in the wrong place. But you got to understand, people are hungry, people are thirsty, people are wanting it. And in a season, like you said, the city of Colossae had begun to fade, even during the time of Paul, some would say. It's still there. It's still in the Lycus Valley. They found an inscription a couple years ago that talked about Marcus, son of Marcus, chief of the interpreters. And so if you got a whole band of interpreters, you've got lots of commerce and trade in different languages. You got a chief of the interpreters. It's not like Kmart yet. I mean, they've not been completely discontinued, but many people do point to Laodicea taking the highlight and kind of stealing, in some ways, the fanfare. And then Colossae makes a comeback with the waters.
Yeah, empires forget Colossae, maps forget Colossae in some ways, but the waters are remembered. And then we get into one of the crazier of the stories that, again, as you and I were sitting there and we're being told these stories, it's like this Byzantine Christianity, and the story that's going to come from it is one that you're like, okay, I don't know what to think about this.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
Are you ready to get into the tradition as the pagans get upset?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
what's
yeah.
about to happen?
So you got Archibus there. He's taking care of the church. The pilgrims are coming. It's beginning to growing. They'll tell us that even up until like 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th century, so 1100 years after Jesus, right? Paul comes here 60 AD. So 1,000 years later, this place is booming. It's one of the most popular, intense pilgrim sites in all of Asia Minor, all of modern day Turkey, and in the world in some regards. And so it started with the dad, the daughter, then Archippus, his caretaker, and then there's like some 10 other churches that get planted here. Well, the main church is still like what we call sometimes like in streaming world of church, like the mothership, right? It's still got the mothership. And the pagans are just upset. They are extremely upset. Our boy Archippus is still alive, according to the story. I mean, he's an old man at this point. And there's these natural rivers. There's two Lycus valleys from the Lycus River. You've got multiple streams and rivers flowing through this. And as the story goes, there's two main rivers that were flowing down the mountain. And the pagans thought, man, we got to do away with these Christians. And we could kill that guy, but what we really need to do is get rid of the church and get rid of that spring and somehow divert the waters. And so what do? You just divert the water, right? So they literally dig a new trench for a new river to go. And they back up the existing rivers and they just let the water just kind of back up. They get the new trench and it's going to go straight for the church. As the story goes, it's going to just wipe out the church. They let the waters back up. They break the dam. Meanwhile, Archippus, like he's an old man. He ain't eating much. Like he's not been working out and he's scared out of the bahookie, right? He is totally scared. And this is where it gets fun. The angel Michael shows up. He's like, do you not know who I am? He's like, yeah, Mufasa. I know who you are. I know you're Michael the Great. Do you not know my power? And he's like, yeah, I know your power. Will you not trust me? Yes, I'll trust you. They're like, get out of here and go stand in there, right? And watch what I'll do. And the pagans, they undam the rivers. The river begins to flow. And as the story goes, Michael shows up right before it's going to like pummel the church and throws his staff in the ground, like you do. And it creates this chasm. And these waters go down into the ground and
Disappear.
Spring up somewhere else. And at that time, the city of Colossae takes on a new name, Hone, Chonae. And that word Hone, it just means funnel or plunged into, because he took a staff, threw it in the ground, and the water just like going down the drain, just like funneled down into the ground.
And that's the modern name of the city that's right there.
It's a diversion of that. Yeah, you got Colossae that becomes Hone, and today it's called Honaz, Honaz. It's all related in this cultural memory.
It's all connected, and so all of these people are making their way still. So this story, when this one comes out, now everyone is like heard it, and so now they're coming to see this amazing church that's been spared, and to go to these like waters, and it just becomes this tradition that just spreads, and people are traveling miles and miles and miles, like they're pilgriming even more to come to these locations. And so now we fast forward, here we are hanging out, and people are still hearing about it and they're still coming. So we talk about the experience of when you were teaching at the restaurant.
Yeah, it's just a restaurant, but man, a couple years ago, we were doing a deep dive, researching, and came across some of these stories. We often talk on our trips, and for decades, people that have gone to these places talk about, hot water, cold water, lukewarm water. It shows up in Revelation 3 that you quoted earlier. And there's all that means and relates to. But as we're digging into, we're like, whoa, it's much more than cold water is refreshing. Like there's something in the water in all of these places. There's more than just hot water as being refreshing. There's more going on there, and there's more going on here. And so this restaurant, about that time, I think it was right after around 2020, we started going to this restaurant, and then around that same time, discovering in our research some of these stories. So a couple years ago, we were at this site, at the restaurant. We're going to go to the tell of Colossae, but it's just a mound, and we do some other things when we get there. And next to the waterfall, there's this little channel that just like runs water down. The whole place is like, it's just insane water mill area. And so we took the whole group to the side. We're all lined up near this little divergent channel. And we're telling these stories of healing in the water, of John and Philip coming through here, of the guy from Laodicea, his daughter was healed, the archangel healing, and yada, yada, yada. So we're telling that story to set up to understand there's something right or wrong, true or false, in people's cultural memory. Something was significant about the water, and Jesus may very well have been tapped in it. So we're doing that. We finish, and we're making our way back in front of the huge waterfall where we sat down and ate to the bus. And our guide there, dear friend Doan, is talking to the owner, a lady, the owner of the restaurant. She's always there, always super pleasant. And it's always been up to this point, thanks for coming. We love the meal, bring more pita, stuff like that. But he says, hey, she wants to know what you're talking about over there. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, well, people come here to eat. People don't come here to teach. Like she wants to know, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I'm talking about like Peter, Philip and John coming through here, the dad, Laodicea, the daughter, the angel, and the healing and the staff in the ground. And as he's translating to her,
She
see
freaks
like
out.
her eyes get the size of saucers, and she leans in and she goes, you know where that happened, right? And I'm like, not really. I just know somewhere. And she goes, it's a mile up the road. Like, do you want me to take you? And there's only one answer to that question, Rich.
Is of course.
Like I'm already in the car. Let's go. And so she takes us. She takes us just up the road and to this a modern picnic area called Goz, Goz. At least that's the English transliteration of it. And there's a huge hole in the ground, bro. And you get close, there's still water. It's this huge mountain cliff face, and it's as if the water is going down in the hole, and you can hear it. And then it does come out, not 2 miles away, but it does come out in 2 different areas just down the way. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. She's like, yeah, this is traditionally where Michael, she's a Muslim. And she's like, people still come to this park today to seek healing from asthma and like eczema and like skin stuff and respiratory stuff. And then she's like, in fact, they come to my restaurant. I'm like, to eat? She's like, no, to be healed. I'm like, today? Yeah. And so behind this behind the waterfall, there's a cave inside, and there's a pool of water. She says people go in that cave to this day, and they inhale the vapors of it. And she's like, they swear their asthma, breathing issues, respiratory, skin stuff is healed and gets better. To this day, bro, there's something they say in the water.
This is the fun of trips, and we'll put a link to a video reel that we made of Gerald talking about this inside the cave when we were there. And this is the fun for us as we make our way through these lands, is that there's stories, there's all these layers of pieces. And as we just kind of walk through here, we got 2,000 years worth of of tradition and thoughts and all these different things.
Yeah.
And it makes more sense, again, when we dig into the New Testament of Revelation, when it's writing to Laodicea, that there is something in the water. So even back then, there was something about the water, like we said, whether or not like it's true or not. Jesus is kind of playing out this thing of going, you've got hot water that's good, you got cold water that's good. What are you guys? Just kind of playing that out. So that's a whole nother teaching for later. But we just see these layers every time we go through here. And I think as we kind of conclude this up a little bit, Gerald, it's kind of fun right now because Colossae is in the midst of about to be fully or at least excavated. They're starting the excavation process. Any thoughts just from what you've read and what you've heard?
Man.
Because we're excited about it because for years it's just been a mound, and it
has.
Was a mound
We've actually
corresponded.
We've corresponded with Dr. Boris Jenner, who is from Pamukkale University. He's going to be leading the excavations there.
And he's the guy who did what?
Well, he's the guy that's he did the scans back in 23, and they're planning on doing the excavations of excavating this whole site. He emailed with you and I a couple months ago, just talking about their plans and, any way GTI could be involved. I want to go there and dig, boss. And so as I mentioned earlier, they did some scans. They discovered there was continuous occupation going back to 3500 BC. So we're talking Chalcolithic time and archaeological time frames all the way up and until New Testament time. And then we know that there's some earthquakes. The whole region is riddled with earthquakes. And the main city of Colossae moved to and became Hone and now Honaz. But we're super, super excited about what they may discover there. But I think when you look back at Colossians, the letter of Colossians, Paul speaks to this. You look at this region. On the one hand, it's easy for us to write off like antiquated mystical mindsets of chasms in the ground and portals to the underworld. But people are seeking stuff, man. They're seeking
Healing.
like physical healing. They're seeking emotional restoration.
Mhm.
They're hungry. They're thirsty. They want hope, and they're willing to do whatever they can do to get it, which isn't too different from the world in which you and I live in, though sometimes we demystifies it with our ads that pop up on our algorithms. But it speaks to this heart that, and Jesus and God are tapping into. Like water's mystical, water's the source of life. And Jesus, man, Jesus in Revelation, Paul in Colossians, Jesus in the Gospels, God in the Old Testament, they speak to that, don't they?
Completely, and this is why we love doing what we do, right? Like it's because we get to open these things up. But in the shadow, of these cold waters, Paul writes one of the most Christ-centered letters in the New Testament. Like he's reminding believers that fullness is not found in angels, mystical experiences, or even sacred places. Like he lays all that out, but it's found in Christ. And when we get our chance to be in Colossae, that's what we're really trying to hone in on, helping people see that, because we live in a world today where we all want healing, like we just talked about. We're all searching these things. We're looking to fill this void. We're looking to heal this part of us that is it's just a chasm. It's just opened up, and there's something going on. Like, and we keep saying that there's a deeper story flowing beneath Colossae, and it's the story of, where do you find these things? You find it in Christ, and that's what Paul does with Colossians. Is he really makes a point to make sure that everyone understands that
Yeah.
it's Christ where you're going to find it.
Totally. I love that verse in Colossians where Paul says the fullness of the deity, like lives in Christ. And then he just says, I think it's Colossians 2:10, in Christ, you have been brought to fullness, or you've been brought to completeness, that he is not just all in all, he's all in all.
Man, it makes me want to do two things right now. One,
Drink coffee.
drink coffee. Well, I guess three things. Got coffee in my hand. It makes me want to go to Turkey when we begin to unpack these things. And it makes me want to go to the Waterfall restaurant, because I could sure go for some pide and some fish and all the other good stuff that is there at the place.
Well, when we
But
go to Israel, we say next year in Jerusalem. So I don't know, maybe for the podcast, it's next year at the Waterfall restaurant.
friends, if you've never been, you got to go. And we hope too that with these next couple podcasts, we're going to be able to bring up some just fun things that we've encountered along the way that are just interesting. They're interesting to us. And as Gerald and I just said, we're not sitting here saying that the water there and the mysticalness of it or anything, but it's just interesting that it feels like the same things in life that we continue to deal with, looking for healing, looking for these things, have always been there. And Christ is the only place where you can actually find it, and that's where the real healing's at. And so we try to replace it with so many things. So many things are going to fix it, but really, again, as Paul directs us right back to, it's to be completely centered on Christ. Well, I guess until the next podcast, everyone take care, and thanks for joining us, Gerald. Thanks for bringing the stories.
Let's do it. Let's do it again.
All right, take care, everybody.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. For more information on upcoming GTI study tours, please find us on the web at www.gtitours.org.